LoveLore Library. Chapter 482 Buying a Shop, 1. Zhou Dong nodded excitedly. Well, definitely work hard. After that, Zhou reminded them to be careful of the cold night and to guard the storeroom well. Once that was done, she turned and walked to the central courtyard. Haitang immediately followed her. When she reached the main living room, Zhou touched the wall and found it almost dry. The room was not as stuffy anymore. Haitang saw this and said, "Madam, from the looks of it, you can move in the day after tomorrow." Box novel. Okay, I'll check later. If the day after tomorrow is good, well, move in the day after tomorrow. Oh, right, when the firewood delivery comes, ask them to send more. There has been a change to the floor heating, so the amount of firewood used in winter will greatly increase. I understand, madam. Zhou paused after hearing that. Halting, we grew up together. We're not biological sisters, but we're closer than actual sisters. Please drop the honorifics. Haitang smiled and shook her head. Rules are rules. To be honest, our family is already very grateful that you saved us from the Zhou family. We can't break the rules, or else it would be difficult to manage if you were to recruit more people in the future. It's up to you, but you don't have to be so reserved in private. Haitang nodded happily. After Zhou asked them to prepare some curtains, she brought Zhou Dong out and went straight to ask for any empty shop lot available. Zhou didn't expect that there would be no such small empty shops in the east or north of the city. However, there were quite a few in the south of the city. Unfortunately, most people living on the city's south side were commoners, so they were relatively poorer. Thus, she looked at Zhou Dong and waited for his decision. Zhou Dong hesitated for a moment before finally nodding his head. The shops east and north of the city were both time-honored brands. As a new shop, he might not be able to compete with them. He might as well go to the city's south to try his luck. Is there a shop with a small courtyard over there? Zhou asked Manager Xiao. Yes, a shop in the commoner district has a small courtyard with 3 main rooms. However, the shop is relatively larger than what you requested. How is the courtyard looking? Has it been repaired after the snow disaster? It's decent, as they are all green brick houses. However, those who want to sell are all from low-income families and have no money to repair the shop. I see, you have to help me lower the price if that's the case. That's always negotiable. Do you want to go over and see the place now? Let's go, Zhou said, walking out. When Manager Xiao saw this, he immediately prepared a carriage and brought them toward the city's south end. They heard many shouting voices as soon as they reached the city's south. It was much more lively than the east or north of the city, and there were also more hints of life. When they arrived at the commercial street, Manager Xiao parked the carriage and led them inside the shop lot. At the same time, he pointed at a row of brick houses and said, "This is the place. Do take a look and see if you take a liking to it." Zhou glanced around, noticing the entire street was clean and tidy. All the shops here had relatively good business, and the best thing is that the flow of people on the roads was much higher than that of North City. Let's go in and take a look. Zhou nodded. If Zhou Dong decided to give up on this place, she would still buy 2 shops here and do some small business. Small businesses on such a busy street were no slouch. The income of a busy shop here would be similar to that of opening a grander restaurant elsewhere. Next, the manager brought them to look at 5 shops, each about 70 square meters. The size and specifications were all the same, and there was nothing to differentiate them. The only thing that differed was the condition of the courtyard houses. Zhou picked 2 shops, and both were corner lot shops. She looked at Zhou Dong and asked, "Brother Dong, what do you think? Which one do you want?" At the same time, she wanted to gauge if he knew how to do business. If he didn't, she had to teach him quickly. Chapter 483 Buying a Shop, 2. Seeing that she had chosen both corner lot shops, Zhou Dong asked, "Will the one in the middle be better?" Manager Xiao shook his head and whispered, "Brother, one can tell you've never done business before. The shop in the middle is often the shop that people despise the most. Unless you have a unique product or the quality of your product is better than others, you will always have fewer businesses than the shops on both ends." Coincidentally, the locations of the two shops Mrs. Gu had chosen are excellent. The shop next to the cart shop is suitable for food-related business, especially for snacks and dry food that could be taken away. Box novel. The other shop is next to a tea house and a cloth shop. As long as you don't start a business related to them, your business wouldn't be bad. Zhou Dong was stunned when he heard that. He did not expect there to be so many details when choosing a shop. He scratched his head with a silly smile and said, "I'll listen to Madam's suggestion then." At the same time, Zhou also had a plan. She nodded and asked Manager Xiao, "Brother Xiao, please make an appointment with the owners of the two shops." "All right, you guys go to the tea house and take a seat. 111 be right back." After Manager Xiao left, Zhou brought Zhou Dong to the tea house. This place was a combination of 3 shops, so it was spacious inside. It was even divided into many small rooms with wooden boards. The environment was great. After entering, she ordered a pot of black tea and 2 plates of dried fruits. Zhou brought Zhou Dong to a single room for 6 people and sat down. She looked at Zhou Dong and said, "If you want to sell snacks, choose the shop near this one. If you want to open a food shop, choose the one by the cart shop. However, the cart shop and its vicinity are relatively chaotic. If you want to open a shop safely, you must be on good terms with the owner of the cart shop." Zhou Dong asked curiously, "What do I sell if one choose the one near the cart shop?" "Steamed buns, flatbread, and baked goods. Any of them is fine, but if you want to make money, you must sell meat-related products. For example, roasted meat, mutton offal soup, beef offal soup, and so on. You can also think of some side dishes, braised vegetables, and alcohol. In this way, a month's worth of your income will be equivalent to a small restaurant. Is it that profitable?" Zhou Dong asked in surprise. "Of course, but it also depends on your cooking skills. As long as you can cook up something tasty, a food-related business near a cart shop will definitely not be bad." "I understand. I'll have to discuss it with my wife first." Zhou nodded and did not persist. Instead, she asked him about their lives over the years. She didn't ask any further questions after learning that, despite some grievances, they had survived the years relatively unscathed. Later, Zhou asked the shop assistant about the price of the row of shops opposite them. After learning that before the disaster, a shop here could sell at least 2,000 taels of silver, she was confident in the purchase. About 15 minutes later, Manager Xiao walked in with a man and a woman. After sitting down and chatting for a while, they found out that 4 of the 5 empty shops on this street used to run food shops, and the one in the middle was a small pharmacy. This year was not a good one, business was bleak, and their family needed more money. That was why they were selling their shops. After a round of bargaining, the 2 shops were set at 1,500 taels each. After that, both parties confirmed the deal. Of course, Zhou Dong didn't want ownership of the shop, he only wanted to borrow it. After getting the shop deed, Zhou returned to the city's east. She gave Manager Xiao 30 taels of silver as a commission and asked, "Manager Xiao, I wonder if you sell servants?" "Servants? How many people does Madame Gu want? Do you have any requirements?" "I want 4 maids, 4 male servants, and 6 elderly women." As for the requirements, I want someone who has been trained well and understands the rules. Another requirement was that those who know cooking or martial arts would be prioritized. Zhou hesitated momentarily and then replied after considering her resident's situation. Chapter 484 Preparing a Farewell Banquet. Although I'm not in the business, I can introduce someone to you. When do you want your servants? Manager Xiao asked. The day after tomorrow. Please bring the people to the Gu residence in the third courtyard of Wudong Lane. Manager Xiao was shocked when he heard her address. If he remembered correctly, all the courtyards in Wudong Lane belonged to the royal family. Immediately, he looked at her with a much more respectful gaze. He nodded repeatedly and said, "Don't worry, I will definitely bring the chosen ones over. Yes, it's best if they have a clean past. Those who have stolen or tried seducing their masters will not be accepted." Box novel. Calm, I will remember that. After the three of them separated, she went to the vegetable market after noticing it was still early. However, there was no one except an old granny selling dried vegetables. She returned empty-handed and found an empty spot to take out a 5-pound grass carp from her interspace. He returned and asked Granny Ma to go to the kitchen and get her some pickled vegetables. She began pickling the fish. Zhou had originally wanted to call the third prince over for a meal but did not expect the third prince to not return to the residence that night. In the end, Zhou had to split some between Granny Ma and the others. The couple then ate the rest of the fish with steamed buns. After entering the interspace at night, Zhou told Gu Qingrui about her shop purchase and said, "Every inch of land in the capital is really gold. Just a small shop in the city's south sold for 1,500 taels. It's not expensive, especially when it was even more expensive 5 years ago." Gu Qingrui then asked, "Oh right, we've been spending a lot recently. Do we still have enough money?" "We should have enough as we have spent less than 10,000 taels of silver. Previously, we had saved up about 90,000 taels of silver." Gu Qingrui was stunned for a moment after hearing that before remembering they had received a massive amount of money from the Qiao family. He nodded and said, "As long as we've got enough, there's no problem." "Oh, right, one have to get some more silver to buy a tarp to cover the shed." "Wait, but planting a greenhouse is your work experiment. Doesn't the Department of Agriculture have public funds?" "No, and I don't want to use it even if there's one. I was thinking of selling some off-season vegetables for money to celebrate the new year. If I used public funds, I wouldn't be able to sell the vegetables for our gains." "I see, take as much as you want. There are still more than 2,000 taels in the villa." "All right." After Gu Qingrui finished speaking, the two of them went to work. After finishing her work, Zhou remembered that she hadn't made a custom-made door sign for the new house. Thus, she busied herself with finding the right words. Zhou then asked Gu Qingrui to write the 2 words Gu Manor in regular script. She also asked him to meet the third prince to make an appointment for a meal together tomorrow night. The next day, after breakfast, she first rushed to make a door sign at the woodworking shop. Later, she brought Granny Ma to the market to buy a packet of pork ribs, a strip of pork belly, a carp, a portion of pork intestine, and a dozen eggs. In the afternoon, she got busy cooking a feast in her small courtyard. When Qiao Lanlan learned that Zhou and the others were about to move out in the evening, she immediately became anxious. Once they moved away, it would be difficult for her to do what she planned to do in the future. However, she had no sterilization medicine on her hands, so she had to look for her superior. After the servant understood her intentions, he lifted his leg and kicked her in the stomach. Preposterous. Did you think what I said to you last time was in vain? You don't need to do anything to her. Your main goal is to wait for King Rui's concubine to enter here. If you spoil our plan, everyone on our side will die. But it's been a few days, and she's still alive and well. Xiao Lanlan huffed indignantly. Idiot, the Emperor has just rewarded them, so do you think the Emperor will stand by and watch if something happens to them? In short, you just have to wait. You'd better not act rashly. After the servant finished speaking, he saw someone coming over and quickly casually switched to a different topic. Are you sure you want the red one? Chapter 485 Family. Yes, I think the red one looks good. It looks festive. Xiao Lanlan was startled for a moment before she laughed dryly and agreed. All right then, I'll get my cousin to bring it to you later. Sorry to disturb you when you're busy. Xiao Lanlan then left quickly. The man only looked at them curiously and ignored them. Xiao Lanlan returned to the kitchen. Although she was still unwilling, she was afraid she would be implicated and lose her life, so she knew she had no choice but to look for another opportunity. Box novel. Calm. Conversely, Zhou had been busy cooking the entire afternoon. When she was almost done, Gu Qingrui and the third prince walked in together. Rui, Zhou greeted him. Bring King Rui into the house first and have a glass of water. The food will be ready soon. Got it. We're not in a hurry. Gu Qingrui replied. After that, he brought King Rui back to their courtyard. The two of them first washed their hands, and then he poured a cup of tea. Your Highness, do take a seat. King Rui didn't stand on ceremony, drank a mouthful of tea, and then asked, Are you really planning to move out tomorrow? Yes, we're almost done packing up there. The sooner we move over, the sooner we can settle down. By the way, we aren't far from each other. Come over for dinner when you're free. I will. If you need any help, just let me know. Gu Qingrui hesitated momentarily and asked, Can you introduce us to a few guards? Recruiting guards is a small matter. The main issue is whether you have enough food for them. It's not a problem for us to eat sparingly until next summer's harvest. King Rui nodded and said, All right, I'll give you 4 people. We'll talk about it later if more is needed. Thanks. Don't treat me like an outsider. We're considered family now. Oh right, when are you planning to hold the housewarming party? I don't plan to hold a grand one, especially when food is tight now. I'll just call a few of our acquaintances and gather. As for the others, one intend to have our residence helpers make snacks and gift them. All right, as long as the etiquette is done, it's all good. The third prince nodded in agreement. To be honest, the third prince's 2 marriages would be enough to break the bank. The cost of holding a wedding was more than twice as high as in previous years. The two of them chatted for a while more, and soon Zhou and Granny Ma began to serve the dishes. They were steamed pork ribs, sweet and sour carp, braised pork, 9-tern intestine, fermented cabbage with meat, stir-fried radish, and a big bowl of egg soup. King Rui smelled the fragrance of the meat, and his mouth started watering. He looked at Zhou and asked, Manager Zhou, when do you plan to open your restaurant? I can't say for sure. Ingredients are hard to come by. Zhou replied after she sat down. At that moment, Gu Qingrui could see through the third prince's intentions because his eyes were fixed on the fermented cabbage with meat. He spooned up some and placed it on the third prince's plate. If you want a change of taste, you can come over to our house. Try this. This is fermented cabbage with meat, combining the meat's taste with the cabbage's crunch. It's delicious. When the third prince heard that there was meat inside, he nodded in understanding. No wonder the fragrance of this dish was so overpowering. He didn't say anything else. Instead, he lowered his head and ate quickly and elegantly. After that, the third prince saw Gu Qingrui enjoying the large intestine. He picked up a piece and put it in his mouth to try it, realizing the dish's deliciousness once it entered his mouth. It was soft and tender, and if tasted carefully, it had all 5 flavors: salty, sweet, sour, spicy, and umami. The dish was fat but not greasy, and he would not get tired of it even after eating a lot of it. It was indeed a rare delicacy. No wonder Gu Qingrui had been staring at this intestine dish. He must have more of this. The third prince saw that Zhou Ying mainly ate the sweet and sour carp, so he followed her and tasted it. The sweet and sour taste was appetizing, and the fish meat was tender and juicy. It was scrumptious, to say the least. He now regretted listening to his cousin's urging and only eating hot pot and barbecue all this time. Chapter 486. Moving out. The third prince regretted not trying out more when he had the chance because he found that the other dishes made by Zhou Ying were more delicious and more suitable for his palate. It seemed he had to help her open her restaurant as soon as possible. After the meal, they chatted for a while. When King Rui found out everything was going well for Gu Qingrui at the government offices, he got up and returned home. The next morning, Zhou Ying was about to go to the woodworking shop to get the door sign when the old butler walked in. He said, "Madam Gu, if you need any help, feel free to ask. His Highness has already instructed that one prepare you a carriage and manpower." "Thank you, Uncle Feng." Zhou Ying thanked him and didn't stand on ceremony. She went straight back to pack up her things and then first transported their luggage to their new residence. Box novel. Calm, Uncle Feng, does His Highness have a tea house under his name? Zhou Ying asked on the way. No. We're mainly in the silver making and wedding related business. Uncle Feng then asked, Madam Gu, what's the matter? There's something I might need help on. I want someone to teach my brother-in-law how to do business, especially running a restaurant. The old butler nodded and replied, well then, 111 go ask Feng Chun later and see if he can help arrange it. Alright, thank you. You're welcome. It's a small matter. Uncle Feng waved his hand. When they arrived at the residence, Zhou Ying asked Zhou Dashing to give each helper a tael of silver as tea money before sending them away. After that, Zhou Ying gave Zhou Dong 20 taels of silver and asked him to retrieve the door sign. She and the others, along with Qiu Nyang, moved their luggage and goods to the storeroom south of the central courtyard. After she was done, Zhou Ying carried out 3 batches of relatively good cloth and handed them to Qiu Nyang. Mother Qiu, please take these. You can use them to make winter clothes. That won't do, or else the clothes we wear as servants will be too eye-catching. You guys should keep them for yourselves. Besides, these cloths were given by the emperor, it's not suitable if we take them. Qiu Nyang immediately pushed it back. There's nothing inappropriate about it. There's no mark that says otherwise. Please take it, I won't have the chance to offer you such great cloth in the future. Ultimately, Qiu Nyang shook her head and took 3 batches of the lowest quality silk. I'll take these. It's decent but not too eye-catching. Alright then. Zhou Ying had no choice but to put her arms back and ask, Mother Qiu, tomorrow morning one will buy some servants for our residence. I want you to be in charge of the inner courtyard. Qiu Nyang wanted to say something but hesitated. I haven't managed people before. I'm afraid I can't do it well. No one is born with management skills. Just try it out. If you can do it, then it's all good. If you feel that you can't do it, I'll find someone else. Alright, I'll try it out then. Zhou Ying nodded and let Zhou Dashing take care of the household chores. She knew that with his personality, he would not be able to take on more of the heavier responsibilities. Finally, she looked at Hai Tang and her husband. You two can stay in the kitchen. Remember, being in the kitchen isn't just for you to cook for us. It's for you to improve your skills as much as possible. If possible, you two should be going to the restaurant to work after it opens. Understood. We will definitely work hard. The couple nodded repeatedly. After that, only Haitang was left to help her tidy up the house. By noon, everything was ready. Apart from the smell of the new furniture, everything was in line with her standards. Haitang returned after washing her face and asked, "Madam, what do you want to eat for lunch?" "Just cook whatever we have. I'm not picky." Zhou replied. "All right, do take a rest while you wait. I will be back soon." After Haitang finished speaking, she turned around and ran out. Chapter 487 Practicing Calligraphy. After Haitang left, Zhou took off her cotton jacket. It was really too hot in the room. Once she had finished her work, she put on her cotton jacket again and went to the small kitchen beside the east wing to close the fireplace. Lunch was simple. There were flatbread, stir-fried pork slices, and some noodles. Zhou invited Haitang to sit down and eat with her. However, as soon as the flatbread entered her mouth, she frowned and looked up at Haitang. "Haitang, did you need this with warm water?" Box novel. Calm, yes, it's more gentle to eat this way. But it's still a little too hard. Next time, use half a portion of the dough made with hot water and the other half at a normal temperature. Remember, the dough must be soft and just big enough to be held in your hands. "Alright, I'll try that." Haitang nodded thoughtfully. Zhou then lowered her head to continue eating. The stir-fried dishes were alright, especially the meat slices. It was obvious that they had been marinated with starch, as they tasted fresh and tender. The cabbage was evenly heated, and it was crisp. In general, this dish was cooked well. However, it was not enough to serve it in a restaurant. Zhou later told Halting the recipe for fermented cabbage with meat and said, "Later, let Brother Biaozi try it. This dish will be one of the restaurant's signature dishes in the future." "How did you come up with this?" "I've never thought of using cabbage to wrap meat." Haitang asked in surprise. "That's why if you want to be a good cook, you must constantly get into a creative mindset. Otherwise, you'll soon fall behind. Aren't those imperial chefs the same? If not for their constant innovation, they would have to change chefs every year." "That's right. I guess we have to study our cooking properly later." "Sure. If you need any ingredients, ask Mother Cho to buy them. It's great to practice your cooking and improve your meals at the same time." "Understood. We will definitely work hard. By the way, is it only the back courtyard that has no floor heating?" "Yes, so we moved to the front." "Okay. Tomorrow, I'll think of a way to exchange for some silver and copper change for their wages. I'll take note of that." After Haitang left the room after lunch, Zhou tidied up briefly and laid on the soft couch to take a nap. When she woke up, she was bored and went to the small study in one of the wings to practice calligraphy. When Haitang came to deliver the tea, she saw her handwriting and smiled. "Madam, your handwriting hasn't improved. It seems that you have to practice more." When Zhou heard her words, she thought of her original self practicing calligraphy. Her original self's handwriting was the same as hers, it was neat and tidy but without any sense of beauty. She put down the brush and said, "Then you try it. I'll have a cup of tea in the meantime." After saying that, she picked up a teacup and retreated to the side. Haitang shook her head repeatedly. "No, I haven't written for many years. I don't even know how to hold a brush anymore." "Give it a try. In the future, when you work at the restaurant, there will be many opportunities to pick up a brush." When Haitang heard this, she braced herself and went up. However, her writing was not good to begin with. In addition to the fact that she had not held a brush for many years, her writing was only a little better than that of Squiggles. It was not comparable to Zhou Ying's writing. Zhou Ying immediately calmed down and shook her head. "You need to practice more. It'll give you a set of stationery later. I will definitely practice diligently. Haitang drooped her head and said. After that, she didn't dare stay any longer. After ensuring that Zhou had no more orders, she immediately ran out as if escaping from the room. Zhou was holding back laughter when she saw this. After drinking her tea, she continued practicing her calligraphy. Chapter 488 Visit 1. At night, Gu Qingrui came home, and everyone had a meal together. After getting to know each other, they went back to their rooms. Gu Qingrui later said, Babe, I'm resting tomorrow. Can you prepare some things? Well, go to the Yang residence and the imperial residence of King'an. Sure. We can't be insensible, even if Yang Shicheng and the others are. Zhou nodded in agreement. She got ready to prepare some gifts. After entering her interspace, she made 6 kinds of desserts and a bottle of wild honey for each family. Box novel. Calm also, she prepared an extra serving of saffron and a pound of bird's nest for Consortin. The couple then enjoyed their night because they finally had their own home. As a result, she woke up late the next day. When she woke up, Manager Xiao had already brought a group of people in. The two of them did not eat and went straight to the front yard. Xiao Bing greets Lord Gu and Madame Gu. When Manager Xiao saw them coming over, he immediately stood up and bowed. Over the past 2 days, he had figured out the situation at the Gu residence. Of course, he did not neglect Gu Qingrui just because he was a 3rd-grade agriculture officer. Instead, he was even more respectful. After all, there were many officials in the capital, but not many were working for the sake of the people. Gu Qingrui was one of them. At the very least, just the mass promotion of sweet potatoes saved many lives. His influence on the Ming dynasty would be even more profound in the future. Manager Xiao, you're too polite. Have a seat. Zhou replied and glanced at the skinny group of people. These are all, right? Yes, they have all been screened according to Madame's requirements. Zhou nodded. She first spread out her spiritual sense and swept it across. Anyone who had an aura of blood or bad luck was eliminated. At the same time, she paid attention to their words. Anyone looking left and right and being meddlesome was eliminated. She pointed to her left and said, Those who know martial arts and cooking, stand aside. I know some martial arts. After saying that, a valiant-looking maid stood on the left. I also know some martial arts. A manservant stepped forward too. Following that, an older woman and a manservant stood out and said they knew how to cook. After that, when no one else came out, Zhou nodded and walked with Gu Qingrui to the middle of the men and women who hadn't stood out. Based on their appearance, they eliminated the sloppy ones. Ultimately, they decided on 5 elderly women, 2 maids, and 3 manservants. Zhou turned her head to look at Manager Xiao and said, These 10 will do. Is that enough? Manager Xiao asked in surprise, as this was less than she requested. According to what she said back then, she chose 4 people less. These are enough for now. Well, talk about it when I need more. Zhou replied. I see. The old women are 8 taels each, the maids cost 10 taels each, and the manservant costs 12 taels each. Manager Xiao nodded and told her the price. Zhou counted and gave him 100 taels of silver, saying, The extra 4 silvers can be considered as compensation for your hard work. You're too polite. If there's anything you need later, just say it. Manager Xiao thanked her as he received the silver notes. After that, he found the contracts of the chosen ones and handed them to her. Once that was done, he led the rest of the people out. Seeing this, Zhou handed the indentured contract to Qianyang and requested that she go to the government office to change their status. The couple later returned to their rooms and drank a bowl of soup. Then, they carried 2 baskets and let the manservant, who knew martial arts, drive them to the young residence in a carriage. After arriving at the place, Zhou left the servant 2 pieces of date cake and told him to wait outside. And they carried the gifts they had prepared for the young residents. When Madame Cui heard that the couple had come to visit, they were shocked but still let them in warmly. Chapter 489 Visit 2. After Zhou and Gu Qingrui walked through the entrance, they went forward and said, "Greetings, grandmother-in-law." "Hello." All right. Sit down." Madame Cui greeted them warmly. "This is just a small token of our appreciation." After Gu Qingrui finished speaking, he handed the basket to her maidservant. After they sat down, the elderly Madame Cui asked, "How are you two? Have you settled down? If you need any help, just let me know. Everything's almost done. I'm on vacation today, so I came to visit you." Gu Qingrui sat down and replied, "Box novel. Calm, that's great. Come over more often when you have time." As soon as Madame Cui finished speaking, Yang Shiqing heard them visiting and came over. Gu Qingrui and Zhou immediately stood up and greeted him. "Nephew, daughter-in-law, Gu Qingrui, Zhou greets uncle. Have a seat. You don't have to be so polite here." After Yang Shiqing finished speaking, he sat opposite Gu Qingrui. "I heard you've been working on some greenhouses these 2 days. You want to grow vegetables, right? Uncle, you're quite well informed. I feel that there are too few winter and spring vegetables, so I want to try to plant some other variety. If I succeed, I could enrich our vegetable selection." Yang Shiqing nodded in agreement. "This idea is very good, but is there any basis for your methods?" "Yes, the temperature is the main difference between winter, spring, and summer. I am assuming that as long as the temperature, water, fertilizer, and sunshine are sufficient, crops can grow anywhere. It's the same principle as when vegetables can grow near a hot spring in winter. There are also bean sprouts. As long as they're placed inside our house, wouldn't they still germinate in the winter?" Yang Shiqing recalled the details of farming and found that what Gu Qingrui said was reasonable. He couldn't help but look at him and say, "Looks like you've studied it seriously. Remember to let us have a taste of your harvest." "Definitely." Gu Qingrui nodded. After chatting for a while, Zhou stood up and said, "Grandma Yang, uncle, you guys continue chatting. 111 Go and see Wanning." "All right." Madame Cui nodded and sent a maid named Chun Tao to bring her over. After they came out, Zhou deliberately asked in surprise, "Miss Chun Tao, where are you taking me?" "Of course, to Miss Wanning." When Chun Tao said this, she seemed to have realized something and smiled awkwardly. "Miss Wanning likes peace and quiet, so she lives in a different place." Zhou nodded and did not say anything else. When she saw the walls surrounding the place, she deliberately asked again, "This place next to a street, I don't think it's all that quiet." Chun Tao didn't answer her question but pointed to a relatively intact courtyard not far away and said, "This is the residence of the young miss. Thank you for your hard work." "You're welcome." After Chun Tao finished speaking, she led her into the courtyard. After handing her over to Chun Shi, she immediately turned around and left. Chun Shi was stunned when she saw her, then she approached her in disbelief and asked, "Madam, why are you here?" "I came here today to visit the young residents." "Where is your young miss?" "She is playing chess with herself in her room." "One will bring you over now." After saying that, Chun Shi brought her into the house. Young Wanning, who heard the commotion, immediately stood up and asked, "Zhou. Welcome, please take a seat." She looked at Chunxi and said, "Bring the pure tea that the young master brought over last time and some snacks." "Yes, Mississippi." Chun, she replied and turned around to leave. Chapter 490 Visit 3. Young Wanning sat down and said, "One heard that you moved. I was thinking of finding an opportunity to visit and congratulate you. You're quite well informed." "Yeah, we just moved in yesterday. If you have time, do come over for a visit." "Definitely. Do you know how to play chess? Do you want to play a game?" Zhou shook her head. "I don't know how to play Go. It's too much for my brain." After that, she noticed the figure of a servant girl swaying outside the window. She thought to herself that they were really watching them closely. Zhou sneered and said in a low voice, "It looks like you have quite a lot of rats here." Box novel. Calm Yang Wanning followed her gaze and saw a shadow quickly fleeting by. She smiled and replied, "Just a bunch of rats in the dark. You'd better be careful. Be careful so that your aides aren't taken over." "I will." After chatting for a while, Zhou asked, "We are going to the imperial residence of King An later. Do you want to come along?" When Yang Wanning heard they were going to the imperial residence of King An, she immediately thought of Princess Mingyu's fate. Thinking back to how she had helped her last time, she decided to befriend her and try her best to stop the tragic fate befalling King An's imperial residence. Yang Wanning stood up and asked, "Can one really follow you to King An's imperial residence?" "Of course, you can. You're not young anymore, so go out and make some more friends. Don't stay at home all the time." "I will. Please wait a moment, as I'll go change my clothes." After Yang Wanning said that, she immediately went into her bedroom to change. After a while, Chun Shi walked in with tea and snacks. Zhou saw that the color of the tea was lovely, so she picked up the teacup and blew on it carefully while taking a small sip. The taste was pure, rich, calm, yet intense. Her appetite was stimulated after she drank it. The tea was smooth and refreshing, with a lingering sweetness. It was a rare and excellent tea. However, after finishing a sip, there is a faint astringent taste. It was weird and out of place. At first, she thought it was her imagination, but after taking another sip, she realized that it indeed had an astringent aftertaste. Zhou looked at Chuanxi and asked, "Chuanxi, these tea leaves are excellent. Can you bring them over for me to look at? I'll buy some later. If you like it, one will wrap some for you." "That won't do. This is a gift from your young master. It's a gift from a younger brother to his older sister. How can one take it away?" Chun Shi nodded understandingly. She turned around, took out a tea box, and handed it to her. After Zhou took it, she scanned it with her spiritual senses. Sure enough, she found a lot of tea leaves that looked similar to pure tea leaves but were of a different kind. She pinched a small handful and wrapped it up. She kept it on her and said, "All right, thank you." After Chun Shi carried the tea box away, Yang Wanning wore a dark green, cross-collared dress. Not only did she not look old in that dress, but it emphasized her slender figure due to her fair and tall stature. Seeing this, Zhou called Chun Shi to accompany them. When they arrived back at Madame Cu's residence, Yang Wanyu was also there. After Yang Wanning stepped forward and bowed to everyone, Gu Qingruo stood up and said, "Uncle, it's not early anymore, so we won't disturb you any further. We'll visit you again when we're free. This is your first visit. How can I let you leave on an empty stomach? It's better to have lunch before you leave." Although Madame Cui hated them, she still stood up and offered politely. "Thank you, Aunt Cui, but we must still visit King An and his consort today." "Oh right, we'll be bringing Wanning along since it just happens that she's free. We'll personally send her back later." Zhou replied with a smile. Madame Cui knew that they were going to visit King An's consort, so she immediately pulled Yang Wanyu up and said, "I see. Since you are going to the imperial residence of King En, then Wan Yu will follow you. Chapter 491 Visit 4. Young Wanning was about to stop her when Zhou smiled and replied, "Sure, they are about the same age as Princess Mingyu. It will be great to talk together when we go over." At the mention of Princess Mingyu, young Wanyu remembered the humiliation she suffered at the palace banquet. She immediately shook her head and rejected the offer. "I'm not going. I'm going to practice dancing with the girls in the afternoon." "Alright, I guess we'll gather again next time." After Zhou said goodbye to the three of them, she turned around and walked out with Yang Wanning. "Grandma Yang, Uncle, and Auntie Cui, farewell." Gu Qingrui gave everyone a salute, then turned around and walked out. Seeing this, Mrs. Cui immediately sent a maid to send them out. Box novel. Calm, she looked at Yang Wanyu and asked, "What's wrong with you?" King An's consort is the Empress Dowager's cousin, and they have a good relationship. You'd better leave a good impression on her. A good word from her would allow you to gain a firm foothold in the first prince's household. With Princess Mingyu around, it's impossible for her to have a good impression of me. Yang Wanyu pouted and then told her about how she was humiliated by Princess Mingyu in public at the palace banquet. "Do you two have any brains?" Yang Shiqing stared at the mother and daughter with a face full of shame and anger. Wouldn't the capital know that he, Yang Shiqing, had become an ingrate? The young couple is not simple. We should be more careful in the future. Madame Cui reminded them. Yang Shiqing paused momentarily, and he quickly understood what she meant. That's right. The young couple assumed respectful attitudes toward them when they entered their residence today. He would have guessed there had been no previous conflict between them if he hadn't known better. Now, it seemed that it was just a matter of giving face. Once their interests were touched, Yang Shiqing was sure the young couple would immediately retaliate. Most importantly, Zhou didn't even reject Madame Cui's proposal. Instead, she worded it in such a way that Yang Wanyu rejected the offer personally. They brought Wanning over. Could it be that they want to get in touch with Madame Consortin? It's possible. Madame Chiao saved the life of the Madame Consortin, and they would not let go of this link. So what? We are not on the same line as King En. Cui Shi huffed. What do you even know? Regardless of rank or seniority, as long as Madame Consortin says something, we have to give in. Yang Shiqing angrily barked. Indeed, her authority cannot be underestimated. You must pay more attention. Just King Rui is already making us think twice before doing something. We must not let her get involved with King An's imperial residence. Madame Cui looked at Mrs. Cui after saying that. Mrs. Cui nodded and left with Yang Wanyu. On the other end, after getting into the carriage, Zhou handed the tea leaves she had wrapped to Gu Qingrui and whispered, "Rui, take a look at what's mixed in these pure tea leaves." At the same time, she stared at Chun's eyes, every word and action, especially her eyes. She knew Yang Wanning trusted this maid very much. If even she betrayed Yang Wanning, her future would be extraordinarily difficult. The request took Gu Qingrui aback, but he still accepted the tea leaves. He unwrapped them and identified them intently. She covered her mouth in shock when she saw this, looking at the tea leaves in Gu Shengru's hand in horror. Fortunately, she did not panic, which made Zhou slightly relieved. Yang Wanning immediately looked at Chun-Shi and asked, "Chun-Shi, what's wrong?" Chun-Shi did not hide anything and told her about Zhou asking to buy and check their tea leaves. Yang Wanning's expression turned solemn after hearing that. Pure was the only tea she had drank recently. If it was anything bad, she could not even imagine the following. Yang Wanning looked at Gu Qingrui nervously, waiting for his results. Chapter 492 Visit 5. Gu Qingrui repeatedly tasted it and stated, "This is made from the leaves of the hardy ice plant, and its taste is very light." If it wasn't for Yinger's sensitive tongue, I'm sure she wouldn't have discovered it. Yang Wanning nodded in agreement. "That's true. I've been drinking these tea leaves for 5 or 6 days and haven't tasted anything unusual." "Hardy ice plant, is it that kind of edible plant?" Zhou Ying asked uncertainly. If that was the case, it meant the merchant had sold them a fake. Otherwise. Gu Qingrui shook his head. He had read about this hardy ice plant in a medical book when living in the Mother Goddess temple. This plant was similar to the snow lotus and grew in the snow. Therefore, it possessed a cold nature. A woman's body would stop ovulating if she took even a small amount of it for 3 months. Even a man could not withstand the side effects of ingesting these, losing his life if he did so for half a year. Thinking of this, he handed a single leaf to Yang Wanning and said, "Take a good look at this. Don't drink the tea leaves when you return home." Box novel. Come over the next 2 days, find an opportunity to visit our residence. I'll prepare some pills for you, take them for half a month to recuperate your body. Yang Wanning nodded repeatedly and said, "I'll remember it. Cousin, can one learn some shallow medical skills from you to protect myself? Didn't Auntie send someone to teach you this before?" "My mother did teach me to identify some common herbs, but not such a rare herb." "Sure, you can come over when I'm free. Learn as much as you can." Gu Qingrui hesitated for a moment but eventually nodded in agreement. However, he still warned her, "However, you cannot kill with the knowledge one teach you. Otherwise, don't blame me for exposing you. I promise you that I will never kill or hurt anyone with that knowledge." Gu Qingrui nodded silently to that. He handed her the remaining leaves and said, "Let's start with this hardy ice plant. Try and pick them out from the actual pu'er tea leaves. Remember not only the shape but also the taste and color." Yang Wanning nodded and took the pile of leaves over to study it with Chen Shi. Zhou Ying shook her head when she saw this. It was not easy for a woman to survive under such an archaic feudal system. She had to learn more, too. Otherwise, it would be troublesome if she had her food spiked in the future. Gu Qingrui saw her solemn face and grabbed her hand with a smile. "We'll be together forever." Zhou Ying smiled and nodded without replying. For a moment, the carriage fell silent, and soon they arrived at the imperial residence of King An. After the 4 of them exited the carriage, they asked the gatekeeper to inform the owner of their arrival. Someone finally came out after a quarter of an hour, an old nanny. When the old nanny saw them, she bowed and said, "Greetings, Lord Gu, Madam Gu, and Miss Yang. Madam Consort An is waiting in the courtyard. Sorry to bother Granny Zhang, please lead the way." Zhou Ying smiled and replied. After that, the group of people followed her into the house. After entering, they finally knew why their reception took this long. It took them about 15 minutes to reach Madame Consort An's courtyard, which was in the 4th courtyard from the main entrance. Just as they entered the courtyard, they saw Princess Mingyu. She came up to them and said, "It's you two. Please come in." After saying that to the 2 girls, she nodded politely at Gu Qingrui and led them into the house. After entering the room, they saw Madame Consort An lying on a bed. Zhou Ying was stunned by that and asked, "Greetings, Madame Consort An, you are? Sorry for being negligent about your visit. I've been suffering from insomnia these few nights, and I'm so sleepy that I can't open my eyes during the day." Madame Consort An sat up and greeted them. She quickly added, "You guys, take a seat. I'm fine." Chapter 493 Treatment. Gu Qingrui looked at Madame Consort An after hearing that. Seeing her face abnormally flushed, he hesitated before asking, Madame Consortin, have you asked the imperial physician to prescribe you some medicine? Yes, but it didn't have much effect, so I couldn't be bothered to drink those bitter medicine soups anymore. I wonder if one can give you a pulse check. You know medicine? Madame Consortin asked in surprise. Previously, when one was in the capital, I learned a little from the Academy's doctor. Over the past few years, I also learned from a doctor in the countryside for 2 years. As long as it's not a difficult illness, there shouldn't be any problems. Box novel. Then let's give it a try. Despite the fact that Madame Consortin didn't believe in the medical abilities of someone from the countryside, she had been tormented by her illness for too long and was still holding out hope. Gu Qingrui went forward and took her pulse. It was high blood pressure, no wonder her face was so abnormal. Does anyone in your family have similar symptoms? Madame Consortin pondered for a moment before slowly shaking her head. I haven't noticed before. Is this illness passed down from generation to generation? If your ancestors had this illness, it would be passed down from generation to generation. If there isn't, it's still possible to get this from natural causes. However, there were many factors in getting this. It could be caused by various outside stresses, or it could be due to physical reasons. One of the most common reasons is due to your diet. Gu Qingrui then asked, do you usually like to eat pork, especially the fatty portion? Do you have a salty palate? It's true. I've loved to eat fatty pork since I was young. As for the taste, the meat won't be fragrant if it isn't seasoned well, so I haven't thought much of it. I see. You have to be careful in the future. If you want to eat meat in the future, it's best to eat more fish, especially sea fish. Otherwise, if your illness continues to develop, it is likely that you will suffer a stroke or even suffer from paralysis. Paralysis? Is it really that serious? Madame Consortin exclaimed, and her body started to sway. Gu Qingrui knew this was bad, so he quickly got someone to bring a needle and an oil lamp over. He used fire to disinfect the needles and quickly pricked her 10 fingers. Quickly, he squeezed out droplets of dark red blood. A moment later, Madame Consortin recovered, and Gu Qingrui pointed at her blood droplets as he explained, if your blood is thick enough to block the blood vessels, it will cause paralysis. Madame Consortin took a good look at her blood and asked, is there a way to treat it? Yes, but you have to take medicine consistently and avoid eating heavy food. Can you cure it? Yes, but you have to cooperate. Your symptoms are mainly thick blood obstructing your blood flow. Meat produces fat, so the first thing we have to do is get rid of this fat. Also, you will have to exercise and drink more water daily. Alright, I'll listen to you. When will the treatment start? I wonder if there are silver needles in the residence. Acupuncture is a great way to start. Yes. Madame Consortin responded and then let Granny Zhang find the manor doctor. Afterwards, she looked at Mingyu and said, you entertain Zhou and the Yang family's girl. Got it, grandmother. Mingyu replied and looked at Gu Qingrui. Lord Gu, please. Gu Qingrui nodded and said, one will try my best. Only then did Mingyu stand up to bring Zhou and Yang Wanning to her courtyard. After beckoning them to sit down, she looked at Yang Wanning and said, Yang Wanning, I'm sorry about what happened at the banquet. If it wasn't for my lack of arrangements, you wouldn't have almost gotten into an accident. Princess, what are you talking about? As long as they have the intention to harm others, they will definitely think of a way. Yang Wanning shook her head. After that, she asked curiously, oh right, why did the emperor look for you that day? Chapter 494 Testing, It's nothing much. One heard there are female soldiers in the north, so I wanted to form a team of female soldiers too. That was why I went to Imperial Uncle to request this. It so happens that day was the day he gave me his reply. Female soldiers, did the emperor agree? He did, but only 10 people are allowed for the time being. Well, see the effect after a year. Can I participate? Box novel. Calm Princess Mingyu looked at her in surprise after hearing that. She quickly shook her head and said, forget it. You should prepare your bridal dowry. As for the candidates, I want to choose them from the commoners. They work hard, have strong bodies, and have good endurance. They are easier to train than the delicate nobles. The thing she was wary of was that she was afraid of getting involved in the fight for the throne, so she had to be very careful with the people she let join her squad. Yang Wanning didn't insist anymore after hearing that. Oh right, after you returned, did the mother and daughter make things difficult for you? Mingyu asked. Not really. At least they won't do that on the surface. That's good. Honestly, I've never seen anyone as arrogant as those CUAS. How can they blatantly mistreat their stepdaughter? As Mingyu said this, she thought of how Zhou Jiaqing had also caused trouble for Zhou Ying. She remembered her kick at the banquet, turned to Zhou Ying, and asked, Sister Zhou, do you know martial arts? When I was in the countryside, I did learn some fist and foot skills for self-defense, but it can't compare to real martial arts. Zhou Ying replied. That's not bad. At the very least, I can't muster the strength of that kick. Mingyu stood up and suggested, let's have a spar. You little girl, they are here to visit your grandmother. How can you fight during such a visit? If you really wanted to spar, just arrange another time. Greetings, Imperial Mother. Why are you here? Mingyu immediately stood up and approached her mother with a smile. Zhou Ying and Yang Wanning looked at each other and immediately stood up to follow suit. All right. Take a seat. Consort called them to sit down while she walked to the head of the table. She looked at Zhou Ying and asked, Zhou Ying, right? Have you settled down in your new residence? The preparations are almost complete. When the time comes, I would like to invite Consort into our housewarming party. Oh, when is it held? It has yet to be decided, but because of the new year, we don't plan to hold a big event. Well, just invite a few close families to come to our house to get to know each other. That's right. I'm sure no one will hold a grand banquet this year. Consort nodded in agreement. After that, she asked them about their hometown situation and Gu Shengru's medical skills. Zhou Ying could naturally tell that she was worried about Gu Shengru's medical skills. However, Zhou Ying knew Gu Shengru's skills could quickly control Madame Consort An's condition with traditional medicine. Therefore, she comforted Consort, saying, as long as Madame Consort follows the doctor's advice, she can suppress her illness in less than half a month. However, it would be difficult to recover completely. That means that this kind of illness requires long-term medication. Yes, if you can completely avoid eating meat and exercise more, recovery is possible. Consort nodded silently. Because Madame Consort was old, she only went out if she had something to do, especially in the winter. Therefore, moving around was tough for her, much less exercising. After chatting for a while, Consort left. Mingyu and the other two didn't continue chatting. Instead, they walked around the courtyard and returned to Madame Consort An's room. They did not expect Consort to be waiting there already. After a while, Gu Qingrui came out from the room. Consort immediately stood up and asked, Qingrui, how is she now? Chapter 495 Sparring. She fell asleep. Gu Qingrui whispered. She fell asleep so quickly. Consort was shocked when she heard this. She knew Madame Consort could only sleep for 1 to 2 hours at dawn daily. At other times, she could not fall asleep, no matter how tired she was. Gu Qingrui nodded and said, to put it bluntly, it's because of the illness that prevents her from falling asleep. It's naturally difficult for her to sleep when it's uncomfortable. Then, he said to Granny Zhang, who had followed him out, "Granny, sorry to trouble you, but can you prepare a stationery set for me?" Box novel. Calm, sure. Granny Zhang responded and went back into the house to take it out. Gu Qingrui immediately wrote 2 prescriptions and handed one to consort and give Madam this prescription for 3 days. After 3 days, change the prescription according to the diagnosis. He handed the other one over and said, "This is for bathing. Pour the medicinal herbs into the bathtub and soak in it for 15 minutes at night. However, pay attention to not letting Madam catch a cold after taking a bath. Also, she must not drink cold water or eat cold food." 111 Remember it. I've really troubled you today. You came here as a guest, but who would have thought you would be coming here for a patient visit? It's fate that we met, so no worries. Consort smiled and nodded. She turned and said to Mingyu, "Mingyu, bring them to the front to rest. Let your grandmother sleep a little longer." "Don't worry, Imperial Mother." Mingyu then brought them to a small training ground at King An's imperial residence. On the way, Mingyu even sent someone to look for King An's son, Yang Ziping. When they arrived at the training ground, Mingyu took out a red tasseled spear and quickly swung with it twice. She looked at Zhou and asked, "Sister Zhou, what weapon do you like to use?" "Dagger." "Ah, daggers. They are weapons that are strong when closing in. Sister Zhou must be good at close combat." Mingyu commented and looked at Gu Qingrui. "Judging from Lord Gus' physique, you should know martial arts too. What are you good at?" "Just like Zhou, a short weapon. To be exact, I'm good at fist techniques." As soon as Gu Qingrui finished speaking, Yang Ziping, the son of King An, walked and dressed as an imperial guard. He also heard Gu Shengru's words and spoke up, "It just so happens that I'm also skilled in fist techniques. Let's have a spar. My skills are nothing before you. Please show mercy, Prince." "Well, just spar lightly," Yang Ziping stated and led the way to the middle of the small training ground. The two readied their stances and started sparring. However, because their movements were too fast, Zhou could not see their movements clearly. The modern military boxing style combined the strengths of various martial arts with different variations. It was firm and robust, and every move was filled with killing intent. Therefore, Gu Qingrui gradually gained the upper hand. Gu Qingrui knew he should not stand out and did not want to expose his trump card. Therefore, after figuring out Yang Zipeng's skills, he deliberately revealed a few openings and was soon at a disadvantage. Ultimately, he was defeated by his lack of stamina. When Yang Zipeng saw him fall, he immediately stopped and pulled him up. "Well done, Brother Gu. One can see that you're someone who practiced martial arts halfway through adulthood, but you're able to withstand so many moves under my kung fu. It's mainly because you showed mercy." Gu Qingrui quickly got up. Yang Ziping shook his head. "If it weren't for your lack of stamina, one would have been the one who was knocked down. Stamina is also part of your strength. It seems that one have to practice more in the future." "You're right. Every time I lose against my brother, it's because of his strength and endurance. Otherwise, I'm sure one will win." Mingyu clapped her hands and said. Chapter 496 Naming, Just Admit It. Women's physical strength and endurance aren't as good as men's, so don't waste your energy trying to form a female soldier squad. Yang Ziping spoke proudly. Just wait and see. If the North can do it, so can I. Mingyu huffed indignantly. Actually, fighting doesn't necessarily rely on physical strength. If you know how to use a pound to deflect 1,000, even a small amount of strength can make a difference. Zhou spoke up. a pound of strength. Mingyu lowered her head and fell into deep thought. Just like the scale we usually use, a small scale with a counterweight can weigh up to 200 pounds. Box novel. Calm Yang Siping looked at Zhou thoughtfully. At this moment, someone came over and told them it was time for lunch. The group of people left the training grounds. Because Madame Consortin had not woken up, it was just Consortin accompanying them for lunch. Lunch was simple, just 4 dishes, 1 soup, and a main course. After the meal, Mingyu confirmed the housewarming party that would be held in 2 days, sparred with Zhou, and left. The couple and Yang Wanning also left soon after sending Yang Wanning and her servant to the entrance of the Yang residence. The couple turned around and returned home. Gu Qingrui rested for a while before taking some snacks and going to the academy to look for a doctor. Meanwhile, Zhou looked for Qiu Nyang. After confirming that she had transferred all the servants she had just bought under her name, she kept their indentured contracts safe. She asked, "Mother Qiu, have they settled down?" "Yeah, I've already given them what they lacked. Their clothes are custom-made according to the color you determined. It will probably be delivered in 3 days. Okay, you and Uncle Zhou help me keep an eye on them. Let me know if there are any dishonest ones, and I will chase them away." "I understand." Mother Qiu then asked, "Oh, right, there are only 2 maids. Do you want to buy a few more? There's still a shortage of food, so let's hold off for the time being." "That's true." Mother Qiu nodded silently when she heard about food issues. After Qiu Nyang left, Zhou called the 2 maids who were on duty in the courtyard over and asked, "Do you 2 have family members?" "In the midst of a previous disastrous year, my family was sold into a death contract. So, having a family is the same as not having a family. One don't even know if they're still alive." The maid who could cook responded. "Remember, if you encounter them in the future, you're not allowed to do anything in the name of the residence." Zhou nodded and warned her. "Of course, you can tell me if you really have any difficulties. It'll help you." "Yes. I will remember this. You can change your name to Kuehua from now on. It represents a sunflower born in the sun. One hope you will be free from illness and disaster for the rest of your life and never live in the shadows." Zhou gave her a name and looked at the other maid, who knew martial arts. "Madam, I have been performing in an aerobatic circus since one was young. Later on, the master died, and we were forced to disperse. Finally, in order to survive, one had to sell myself as a servant. Why didn't you find someone to marry back then? Isn't it better than being a servant?" When I was practicing aerobatics, I was injured and will never be able to give birth for the rest of my life, so, at this point, she lifted her shirt. Zhou saw the 2 scars on her belly and asked in surprise, "How did you get injured?" "I fell onto a blade." "Have you ever worked at a residence before?" Zhou nodded and asked. "I did, but because I have a big appetite, so one was sent back." Zhou looked at her robust body and nodded. "From now on, you'll be called Shizhu. It represents the carnation flower, a flower with the strongest vitality. One hope you can continue to live strong. As long as you're loyal, we'll be responsible for your retirement." Chapter 497. Not a single one entered. "Thank you, madam, for giving me this name. One swear to be loyal to you." Shizhu immediately bowed. "There's no need to swear that. Just do your best. In the future, you'll work by my side. As for Kuihua, you'll be in charge of all the courtyard affairs. Also, go and ask Mother Qiu for an elderly woman to help you with some menial work. Alright, you 2 can go on with your work." Box novel. Calm, yes. The 2 girls responded, then turned around and walked out. After they left, Zhou poured 2 cups of tea. After drinking it, she went inside to practice her calligraphy. On the other side, after Yang Wanning and Chun Shi returned to the residence, they did not return to their small courtyard directly. Instead, they walked to the pavilion beside the lotus pond in the backyard. After confirming that no one was around, Yang Wanning asked, Chun Shi, who else touches the pot of tea leaves that you usually deal with? The little servant girl from the small kitchen, Chower. Chower, that 13-year-old little servant girl. Yes, I usually make tea in the kitchen, I don't avoid her. Keep an eye on her and see if she did it. We must find the person behind the scenes from her. Yang Wanning's eyes flashed coldly as she said this. She felt that her mother might not have just frozen to death and that her death might somehow be connected to the hardy ice plant. I understand. Be careful, especially when it comes to food. You have to be careful too, and don't eat anything of unknown origin. Yes. After that, the two of them chatted for a while more before getting up and returning to their small courtyard. On the other hand, Lian Qiao slowly returned to her courtyard and was about to hide in the kitchen when Zhou Jiaqing, who was waiting for her, called her in and asked, How is it? How many people have we arranged that have managed to enter? None of them went in. Lian Qiao lowered her head and replied carefully. Zhou Jiaqing was stunned and asked, What's going on? Why didn't any of them enter? One don't know either. I heard that when they were choosing servants, they just took a glance and eliminated most of the choices. They didn't even buy enough of what they were planning on buying. Trash, so you haven't even found the reason. On the surface, there are only 2 reasons. One is to require someone with cooking skills, and the other is martial arts skills. However, one of the people I arranged to enter knew how to cook, but for some reason, she was eliminated in the first round. When did Zhou become so smart? Lian Qiao lowered her head even more. Honestly, she didn't understand how Zhou could completely avoid choosing the people she arranged to infiltrate their place. Go down, ask around, and wait for her to buy more servants next time. Zhou Jiaqing waved her hand in annoyance. Lian Qiao immediately nodded and ran away. Zhou Jiaqing looked at her and snorted coldly. She doesn't have much courage, but she sure has a lot of ambition. Useless. After that, she started to plan how to deal with Zhou. However, she was aware that she had recently suffered greatly due to Zhou. She must not be rash this time. It was preferable to hit her with a single strike, otherwise, she would be in a bad position. At night, after the couple was done with their work in the space, they cooked 2 bowls of wontons and ate them. Gu Qingrui asked, Yinger, can you help me get a bottle of high blood pressure medicine? Why? Do you want to give Madame Consort and those medicines? Yes, her symptoms are very serious. It's very difficult to control them with only traditional medicine. Besides King Rui, she's probably our best backer, so we must keep her alive. Chapter 498 The Guard's Arrival. Alright, as long as you don't bust our cover. Don't worry, I'll crush the medicine and mix it in with some syrup. As long as she doesn't have a laboratory to test it, she won't find out. Just be careful. After Zhou reminded him, she handed him a bottle of relatively ordinary blood pressure medicine. After a moment of hesitation, she also took out a bottle of fast-acting blood pressure medicine and handed it to him. Gu Qingrui took it and kissed her on the cheek. You go ahead and go to sleep first. Remember, come and pick me up tomorrow once I'm done over there. Box novel. Calm. After saying that, he went up to the villa's 2nd floor. Seeing this, Zhou got up to wash the pots and bowls, showered, and left her interspace. She set a vibrating alarm on her phone and placed it beside her pillow in case she overslept. The next day, after Gu Qingrui finished morning court, he went to the imperial residence of King An. He returned to the residence after giving the blood pressure medicine that he had altered to Madame Consortin. After the couple ate lunch, Zhou stood up and asked, "Are you going to the manor?" "That's right, the Emperor has already approved of the greenhouse experiment, so one can go to the manor after reporting to the government office daily." "I'll go with you. I'm getting rusty staying here." Zhou stood up and said. "Sure, but you have to change into some old clothes." "Of course." Zhou changed her clothes and went to the government office with him. However, she did not go in. Instead, she waited at the entrance. Once Gu Qingrui came back out, there were 4 people behind him. After some introductions, Zhou learned that these 4 were assistants sent to help him by his higher-ups. However, only one of the assistants, Chen He, was an actual 7th-grade official. The other 3 were all former soldiers. After some small talk, Gu Qingrui ushered them into their carriage and rushed to the manor. When they arrived at the manor, Zhou saw that a big shed had already been built. She asked Head Fong to call a few farmers and young, strong women over. She began to lead them in cultivating sweet potato seedlings. This way, they could have a harvest as soon as possible, solving the problem of food shortages in the manor and their residences as quickly as possible. Gu Qingrui smiled and let her be when he saw this. Later, he brought Chen He and the other 3 to get busy. When they returned home at night, it was already dark. As soon as they entered their residence, Qiu Niang came over and said, "Mistress, Butler Feng brought 4 people with him today. He said that those are people given by his master to guard the courtyard." "Yes, one request King Rui for these 4 people. I'll talk to them later," Gu Qingrui said at this moment. "All right." Qiu Niang continued, "There's also Zhou Dong's matter. Butler Feng mentioned that he'd be working at a tea house tomorrow." "Mistress, do you know about this?" "I am aware of this. Didn't Zhou Dong mention he wanted to do business previously? Because he had no prior business experience and had no idea how to manage it, one wanted to take advantage of the time now and allow him to learn quickly so that he wouldn't be caught off guard in the future." "I see. Thank you for your arrangements, mistress." Qiu Niang bowed excitedly. "Mother Qiu, you don't have to be so polite. All right, hurry up and arrange for lunch, we're all hungry." "Of course." After Mother Qiu left, the couple quickly washed up and ate lunch. Today's dishes were sumptuous. In addition to the flour paste noodles and black steamed buns, there was steamed meat with vermicelli, fish balls and radishes, stir-fried cabbages, and a bowl of steamed garlic eggplant. As Zhou ate, she wrote down the dish's shortcomings and strengths and handed them to Shizhu, asking her to pass them on to Biaozi. After entering the inner space at night, Gu Qingrui asked, "Shouldn't we think of a way to get some rice out? Otherwise, it's tough to swallow eating flour paste noodles twice a day." Chapter 499. A struggle, ill find an opportunity. After all, we can't keep using Mother Goddess as an excuse. "Oh, right, King Rui is getting married soon. Have you thought about what to gift him?" Zhou asked. "Right, you'll prepare some congratulatory gifts for him accordingly, and then give him a book on the 36 stratagems. 36 stratagems. You'd better think of an excuse for how you got your hands on it. Information in these ancient times isn't as developed, so I can just make it up. As long as it's unique, he won't delve into the specifics." On the other end, King Rui finished reading the message sent by Guard Chu and said, "Since the Yen fellow has returned, keep an eye on him for the next 2 days. I don't want to marry an unfaithful wife." Box novel. Yes. At this point, Guard Chu hesitated and said, "Since your highness already knows that Miss Sun's heart belongs to someone else, why not report this to the emperor to choose another concubine? If I do that, Miss Sun will die, and even the Sun family will be implicated." Grand Scholar's son is a relatively upright person, educated, and talented. If he died just like that, it would be a great loss to the Ming dynasty. But, what if, she can only die of illness? I understand. One will definitely request that the informant keep an eye on them. After saying that, Guard Chu turned around and walked out. King Rui once again glanced at the information about Yen Jiwu, the young master of the Yen family, returning to the capital. A sharp glint flashed across his eyes as he muttered, "I do wonder if you will choose your future or a beauty." Of course, when Yen Jiwu returned home at night and confirmed that Sun Miaoke was engaged to King Rui, he fell into silence. But in the end, he still decided to go to the Sun Manor to take a look. However, just as she was about to leave after changing his clothes, his mother walked over and asked, "Wooer, where are you going?" "Mother, one want to go see my cousin." Yen Jiwu replied directly. "You might dare to do it, but I won't allow you to go." "Why?" "I'm just going over to take a look." "I won't do anything." "Take a look." "So what if you're just taking a look? Since you missed the chance, just give up. If we continue this farce, both our families will be in trouble." "But, no buts. If you go over now, you will only make things difficult for both of you. What else could you do? Defy the decree and let everyone die with you? Or are you planning on eloping? If they catch you, you'll die. If they don't catch you, you too still have to be dead. As for the Yen and Sun families, what would happen to us in the future once we lost the emperor's favor? Moreover, it's been a few days, and the Sun family hasn't sent over any letters. It's evident that they don't want you to pester them anymore. No matter what, some things have to be made clear. You're not allowed to go at night. Mother will bring you there tomorrow morning if you really want to visit her." Mother Yen turned around and left after she finished speaking. Yen Jiwu looked at her back, and his heart was a mess. He knew clearly that his mother was right. No matter which choice he made, it would not end well. The only way out was for the two of them to return to being only cousins from now on. But he really liked her, and he was unwilling to let go just like that. At the very least, he had to know what she was thinking. At the thought of this, he returned to his room to take a bath and change his clothes. After everyone fell asleep, he quietly went out. Walking on the empty street, his heart slowly calmed down. Would he really stir up the two families for his own selfish reasons? After wandering around the streets for a while, he finally turned around and returned home. Sun Miaoke naturally knew the day Yen Jiwu returned to the capital, so she had been waiting for him to come to visit her at night. She waited for an entire night. However, when the sun rose, she still did not see the figure that she had been thinking about daily. Chapter 500. I'm tired. Her personal maid, Qing Tao, came in with a basin of water. When she saw Sun Miaoke sitting in front of her window with a pale face, she quickly put down the basin in her heart and asked anxiously, "Miss Feng, did you not sleep all night?" "Qing Tao, I'm tired." After Sun Miaoke finished speaking, she fainted in her arms. Qing Tao was so frightened that her soul almost flew out. She quickly checked Sun Miaoke's breathing. After confirming that she was still alive, Qian Tao heaved a sigh of relief and reached for Sun Miaoke's forehead. It was frighteningly cold. After that, she quickly called a maidservant on night duty and asked her to promptly inform the madam. Box novel. Calm, she then helped Sun Miaoke onto her bed, covered her with a blanket, and began to rub her cold hands. When Mrs. Sun received the letter, her heart skipped a beat. Over the past few days, her daughter has kept a low profile. She thought she had thought things through and did not expect that she was just waiting for Yen Ziwa's return. At the thought of this, she was both angry and heartbroken. Mrs. Sun was angry that her daughter didn't cherish her body but heartbroken because she had to encounter such a thing. But no matter what, she immediately called for a doctor and rushed to Sun Myok's small courtyard. After entering, she looked at Qing Tao, who was rubbing her daughter's feet with great effort. She asked, "Qing Tao, how is she?" "Her forehead is still cold, but it's much better." Qing Tao shook her head. When Mrs. Sun heard that, she went forward. She saw that Sun Myok's face was abnormally red and immediately touched her forehead. As expected, she had a high fever. Mrs. Sun immediately got up and went to the basin to get a cold towel. She placed it on her daughter's forehead and poured her a glass of warm water. However, Sun Myaka didn't open her mouth, so Mrs. Sun couldn't feed her even a single mouthful of water. When Mrs. Sun saw this, she got anxious. She hugged her daughter's head and cried, "You wretched girl, are you trying to take your mother's life?" Sun Myaka started mumbling nonsense after hearing some voices. However, Mrs. Sun could not hear a single word of what she said clearly. Instead, she heard the phrase, "brother." When Mrs. Sun heard that, she cried even harder. She knew without guessing that Sun Myaka was not referring to her actual biological brother. However, she took the opportunity to feed her some water with a spoon. About an hour later, a white-haired doctor finally entered the residence. Mrs. Sun hurriedly stood up and greeted him. "Doctor, my daughter is running a high fever now. Please think of a way quickly to prevent her from falling ill again. Let's talk about it after I make a diagnosis." After the doctor finished speaking, he put down his first aid kit and went into the courtyard to give Sun Myaka a serious checkup. He soon walked out and said, "Looking at your daughter's appearance, I'm afraid there's something troubling her mind. If she doesn't get rid of what's plaguing her mind, I'm worried her illness will be difficult to cure. As for her high fever, it was due to a cold. Find some high-proof alcohol and get a maidservant to rub her body with it. It should be able to lower her fever. I'll give you a few prescriptions later. After sweating it off, her body will be fine. However, I can't do anything about her mental illnesses." When Mrs. Sun heard this, she immediately got Qing Tao to get some alcohol. As for the doctor, he immediately wrote a prescription and asked for someone to boil the medicine. He sat in the outer courtyard and waited for the results. About an hour later, Sun Myok's high fever finally subsided. Although she still had a fever, it wasn't as life-threatening anymore. Mrs. Sun finally heaved a sigh of relief and slumped in a chair. At this time, Grand Scholar Sun walked in. Seeing Mrs. Sun slumping down in a disorderly manner, his heart jolted. He looked at the doctor and asked, "Doctor, how is my daughter's illness?" The doctor stood up, bowed, and repeated his words. "Your daughter's fever has stabilized for the time being. Take some time and walk her through what's plaguing her mind. It'll come back in the evening." After saying that, the doctor picked up his first aid kit and walked out. Chapter 501 Discussion 1. After Grand Scholar Sun sent the doctor away, he told Mrs. Sun, "Darling, since Myok's condition has stabilized, let's go to the front. My sister-in-law and Jiwoo are here. No matter the result, we have to solve this matter as soon as possible." "What? They dare come over?" Mrs. Sun immediately stood up and rushed out. Grand Scholar Sun immediately grabbed her and said as he walked out, "Calm down. We can't blow this matter up." Although Mrs. Sun was still angry after hearing this, she did not act rashly. Instead, she asked, "What do you think we should do next?" Box novel. Calm Grand Scholar Sun hesitated momentarily and replied, "In a while, let's see their reaction first. You can act according to my tone." He could tell that his daughter really liked Yen Jiwoo. For the sake of his daughter's future happiness, if Yen Jiwoo performed well, he did not mind giving him a push. Otherwise, he'll just break their relationship clean. Mrs. Sun immediately followed after him. As soon as they entered the central room of the main courtyard, Yan Jiwu and his mother immediately stood up and asked in unison, "How is Miaoke?" "Her condition has stabilized for the time being." After the Grand Scholar's son finished speaking, he called them to sit down at the head of the table. Meanwhile, Mrs. Sun sent all the maidservants out and asked her personal servant to guard the door. Yan Jiwu did not sit down. Instead, he asked, "Uncle, can I visit Miaoke?" "It's not a good time. Let her rest for a while." Grand Scholar's son shot a cold glance at him and replied. Yan Jiwu looked at Mrs. Sun with a look of unwillingness. However, Mrs. Sun did not have a good impression of him now, so she turned her head away. Furthermore, before confirming their intentions, she couldn't risk tarnishing her daughter's reputation. Otherwise, the entire Sun household would be in jeopardy. When Yan Jiwu saw this, no matter how anxious he was, he could only sit down obediently. When Mrs. Yan saw this, although she was slightly aggrieved, she couldn't say anything to refute the son's decision. She looked at Grand Scholar's son and asked, "Brother-in-law, what do you think of this matter?" "The imperial edict has already been issued." The Grand Scholar's son replied helplessly. Then, he asked, "What are you guys thinking?" "What I mean is, it's good for both our families to pretend that nothing happened." Mrs. Yan hesitated for a moment and answered. To be honest, if it weren't for the imperial edict, she would have been quite satisfied with Sun Miaoke as her daughter-in-law. However, it was too late, so it was better to separate their relationships as soon as possible. Otherwise, if this issue continued, both sides would suffer, and it might even affect the future of the two families. "That's right. I think so too." Grand Scholar's son was a little embarrassed when he heard this, but he still nodded his head in agreement. "I don't agree," Yan Jiwu stated. "What can you do? Throw away your future and go to the emperor to plead for mercy." Grand Scholar's son raised his head and looked straight at him with sharp eyes. If he dared do that, Grand Scholar's son would dare to risk it for his daughter's happiness. He was afraid that Yan Jiwu did not have the courage and did not actually care that much about his daughter. Yan Jiwu was about to speak when Mrs. Yan immediately stopped him. "No, if you make a scene in front of the emperor, you will lose your life." The Grand Scholar's son didn't reply but looked at Yan Jiwu silently. Even Mrs. Sun looked at Yan Jiwu expectantly because this was the only way for the young couple to be together openly. For a moment, Yan Jiwu became the center of attention in the room. Chapter 502 Discussion 2. Yan Jiwu looked at his mother's worried and disapproving eyes, then at the Sun couple's expectant eyes. He was caught in a dilemma. After hesitating for a moment, he looked at the Grand Scholar's son and said, "Uncle, I would like to see Miaoke. If she is willing to marry me, I am willing to enter the palace to give it a try." "I don't agree." After Mrs. Yan finished speaking, she dragged him out. "Mother, this is our only chance. Let me try. No matter if it succeeds or not, I won't regret it in the future." "You bastard, have you ever thought about your father and me? You might lose your life if you go. I don't want to see you die." Box novel. Calm. Also, if we anger the emperor, it will be a disaster for our two families. When Mrs. Yan said this, she looked at Grand Scholar's son and said, "Brother-in-law, don't just watch. Hurry up and persuade him. Are you really prepared to lose your beloved daughter and even bury your entire family with her? The emperor is a wise ruler," Grand Scholar's son declared firmly. Even though the emperor was narrow-minded and easy to suspect, he was still commendable in other aspects. Otherwise, the country would have been in chaos long ago. Mrs. Yan choked on her words but did not dare refute him. She just grabbed onto Yan Ziwa's arm and said, "Anyway, you can't go." Grand Scholar's son looked at Mrs. Yan's vehement opposition, and his heart began to waver. With her attitude, even if they succeeded in the end, his daughter would have a hard time marrying him. If Yen Ziwis or the Yen family's future were affected because of their marriage, then her daughter would be doomed regardless. He spoke up, saying, I still have something to do, so one won't keep you here. There are still 2 days. 2 days later, when the third prince's betrothal gift arrives, there will be no room for you to ease up. After saying that, he stood up and walked out. Yen Jiwoo wanted to stop him, but Mrs. Yen forbade him. When Mrs. Sun saw this, she was also dissatisfied. She was tired of watching a double act from this mother and son. She got up and said, Cousin sister, Jiwoo, you two should go home and discuss it properly. I have to go and watch over Miaoka. Auntie, one want to visit Miaoka. Yen Jiwoo immediately repeated his request. Mrs. Yen didn't object this time, but Mrs. Sun rejected it directly. Forget it. She's sick in bed now, and it's inconvenient for her to see anyone. Afterward, she left her personal maidservant to accompany them while she went to Sun Myaek's room. When Yen Ziwa's mother saw this, she also knew that the Sun couple did not welcome them any further. She immediately pulled the reluctant Yen Jiwoo out and left their residence. Yen Jiwoo thought of the Sun couple's attitude and knew that before he made up his mind, they would not let him see his cousin sister again. In the end, he decided to follow his mother back home obediently. He planned to take some time to discuss it with his father before making a decision. As soon as Mrs. Sun entered her room, Sun Miao struggled to get up. Mrs. Sun immediately went forward to hold her down and said, Come on, do you know how sick you are? I lurry up and lie down. Mother, is cousin here? He came to see me, right? Sun Miaoka grabbed her mother's sleeve and asked her with an expectant look. Mrs. Sun paused for a moment and waved at Qing Tao. Qing Tao immediately put down the food tray in her hand, bowed, and led the maidservants out of the room. After they left, Mrs. Sun helped Sun Miao sit up. After a moment of silence, she gave in under the urging of her daughter's eyes and told her everything they had just said. Chapter 503 You can't marry her. When Sun Miaoka heard that her cousin brother would beg the emperor to marry her, she was both worried and happy. She felt that she had not misjudged him. However, when she heard her aunt's objection, she was shocked. She did not expect that her aunt, who had always been kind and amiable to her, would suddenly oppose their marriage. Mrs. Sun shook her to ensure that Sun Miaoka returned to her senses before saying earnestly, Miaoka, if your aunt's attitude is that firm, then you only have one way out, and that is to elope. Box novel. Calm, however, the consequences of that will be serious. First, if you escape, you'll be considered dead. You'll have to hide your names for the rest of your lives. If things don't go well in the future, you two might blame and hate each other. In the end, you two will end up miserable. Second, if you are captured, what awaits you will be death, which will definitely implicate both our families. Even if the emperor is merciful and doesn't confiscate our homes, it will still affect the marriage of our clan's younger generation. As for your aunt, Mrs. Sun sighed and said, don't blame her. From her point of view, she's only stopping you two from being together for your cousins and the Yen family's futures. So, in my opinion, you should just cut it off. Cut it off cleanly. Mother, Sun Miaoka threw herself into her mother's arms and cried. Seeing this, Mrs. Sun could only pat her back to comfort her. After a while, Sun Miaoka raised her head and said, didn't father say there were still 2 days? One will wait for 2 more days. If there is still no result after that, I will listen to your arrangements. Mrs. Sun was stunned for a moment. In the end, she nodded and said, you should sleep. No matter what, you have to get your health back first. All right. Seeing that her mother didn't object, Sun Miaoka heaved a sigh of relief and lay down. Mrs. Sun waited for her to fall asleep before leaving the room. She then instructed Qing Tao to take good care of Sun Miaoke before turning around and leaving. After dinner, Yan Jiwu went to the study to find Lord Yan. When Lord Yan saw him enter, he pointed to the stool beside him and finished writing something. He waited for Yan Jiwu to sit down and asked, "Are you here because of you and Miaoke? Did mother tell you?" Yan Jiwu nodded and asked, "Like I said, my opinion is the same as your mother's." "Why, Yan Jiwu had just opened his mouth when Lord Yan raised his hand and interrupted, "Your mother already said most of everything, so I won't say anything about the future of you and our family. I just want to ask you a question. Why do you think the Emperor would bequeath Sun Miaoke to the third prince and your sister to the seventh prince?" Yan Jiwu was stunned by the question. He slowly shook his head and asked with a puzzled expression, "It can't be. The relationship between the Yan and the Sun families is good, but it's not to the extent of wearing the same underwear." "Wrong. Although your uncle is just a scholar, he has a teacher-student relationship with the seventh prince. Also, he has cultivated many students over the years. In addition to your grandfather's position as the commander of the Nine Gates, do you think the Emperor would be at ease handing over all these connections to the seventh prince?" "Father, did someone say something to you?" Yan Jiwu looked at him in shock and asked. Lord Yan replied unhappily, "Although your father was born in the army, I have been in office for more than half my life. Moreover, I am one of the Emperor's confidants. You don't really think that I am some idiot who doesn't know politics, do you?" He paused momentarily and continued, "Go back and study this web of relationships carefully. The Emperor's bestowment of marriage is not without reason. So you can't marry Sun Miaoke, she can only marry the third prince." Chapter 504 Letting Go. Yan Jiwu fell into deep thought after hearing that. When Lord Yan saw this, he waved his hand and said, Go back and think about it. Unless you're willing to give up your present glory and wealth to be a pair of free and wild cranes that may be hunted at any time. Remember, you are the eldest grandson of the Yan family, the pillar of the Yan family." Yan Jiwu nodded and returned to his courtyard with a heavy heart. He entered his study room and took a pen and paper to write and draw for hours. Realization dawned upon him, and after 2 hours of writing, tearing, and more writing, he finished a letter to Sun Miaoke. After handing it over to his mother the next morning, he set off for the military camp. Mrs. Yan looked at the letter as if it were a hot potato. Because when she saw her unshaven and dispirited son appear in front of her, she had already guessed the contents of the letter. However, for the sake of the future of the two families and to give Sun Miaoke an explanation, she still braced herself and personally handed the letter to Sun Miaoke. "Miaoke, you two are not fated to be together in this life. I hope you two can meet again in your next life." After saying that, she did not dare stay any longer. She stood up and patted Mrs. Sun's shoulder before quickly leaving. When Mrs. Sun saw this, she felt more at ease. Although she was angry at the Yan family's decision, she understood their reasons. She stared straight at Sun Miaoke, afraid she would do something stupid again. Sun Miaoke had naturally guessed Yan Ziwa's answer. The words in the letter were all too familiar, but when she opened it, she realized she didn't recognize a single one. The meaning of its contents was utterly lost on her. At the same time, her tears fell like broken pearls. Mrs. Sun's heart ached, but she also knew that Sun Miaoke had to go through this herself. She only stood guard and did not go forward to comfort her. About 2 hours later, Sun Miaoke finally calmed down and carefully read the letter that was drenched in tears. There was no mention of love in the letter. Instead, it gave her a breakdown of the capital's current situation. The last thing he mentioned was that they had all been raised in luxury since they were young. It was time to repay their parents and families, so they could not be too selfish. After Sun Miaoke read it 3 times, she calmly asked Qing Tao to bring an oil lamp and burn the letter. "Mother, I'm tired, I want to sleep." Mrs. Sun looked at her in a daze and asked, "Miaoke, are you all right?" "Mother, don't worry. I'm fine. I just want to sleep." Sun Miaoke turned around and closed her eyes. Mrs. Sun could only give Qiao Tao a look, turn around, and walk out. As soon as she left, Sun Miaoke started crying again. After a while, she covered herself with the blanket and cried loudly. She only fell asleep after she was all exhausted from crying. When she woke up again, it was already the next morning. Listening to sparrows chirping and looking at the bright sunlight outside, she sat up and stretched. "Qiao Tao, I'm up. I'm here." Qiao Tao responded and ran in. Looking at the energetic and radiant Sun Miaoke, she exclaimed in disbelief, "Miss, you." "I'm fine." "All right, hurry up and clean up so I can have breakfast, I'm going to faint from hunger." Sun Miaoke said as she put on her clothes. "All right, I will go prepare breakfast immediately." Seeing this, Qing Tao knew Sun Miaoke had really thought it through. She quickly turned around and ran out. Chapter 505 Return Letters 1. When the third prince received the news at night, he only nodded expressionlessly. The next day, he asked butler Feng to prepare the betrothal gifts. At the same time, the first prince carried 18 sets of betrothal gifts to the Yang family. In the blink of an eye, half a month had passed. Zhou basically had to go to the manor to help busy herself daily, and it was not until a heavy snowfall that she stayed home for once. Meanwhile, the snow forced Gu Qingrui to stay at the manor. In the evening, Zhou sent him some food, thick clothes, and blankets through her interspace. She later got busy in her interspace too. First, she scanned through the various Mother Goddess temples and heaved a sigh of relief after ensuring there was no huge disaster. She later transferred the half-worn quilts she had collected from the Qiao family to the beggars in the north and gave them some onions and ginger to ward off the cold. The next day, when the sky was already bright, noticing everyone sweeping the snow from the courtyard, she did not stay idle. She took a wooden plank and went forward to help. Seeing this, Shizhu quickly went forward and said, "Mistress, we servants can do these rough jobs. You should hurry into the house. It's fine. One didn't grow up pampered. What work haven't I done before? Let's clear the snow as soon as possible so there won't be ice everywhere the next morning," Zhou said. When Shizhu heard her say this, she immediately thought of Zhou, covered in soil, as she followed the old farmers into the fields. She could only say, "All right, but please take it easy and don't tire yourself out." After saying that, they both got busy. Because there were only a few people in the residence, it was already close to noon when all the snow was cleared out. After washing up and drinking a cup of water, Shizhu reported that Heartwarming had come with many things. Zhou was surprised before she quickly stood up and greeted him. "Brother Zhou, when did you return to the capital?" "I came back yesterday afternoon. I wanted to come over, but it snowed, so one delayed it by a day. By the way, your father-in-law requested that I transport all the food and dried vegetables you left home in case you don't have enough food. One also added some rice for you. There were also some things that Chang Shun and the others had prepared, mainly a few chickens and 2 frozen sheep. I'm sure it's been hard on you to transport all that. Please, come in quickly." After Zhou finished speaking, she brought him into the house. At the same time, she said to Shizhu, "Go and tell butler Zhou to bring some people to store these things. Also, please prepare a pot of sunflower tea." The 2 servants responded one after another and turned around to get busy. Heartwarming said, "I say, sister, you don't lack money. Why didn't you buy a few more servants? Only having 2 maids isn't enough. I'm not short of money, but I'm short of food. One can't buy more servants but just let them starve, no. Oh, true. This year, money doesn't really mean anything. By the way, when is Brother Goo coming back? Shall we have mutton hot pot together tonight? Zhou Huaiming asked. He's busy planting a greenhouse in the manor. Coupled with the slippery roads and the snow, he might be unable to return tonight. However, call King Rui over if you want to eat hot pot. I'll make it for you too. Or I'll prepare some seasonings and meat slices for you. You can bring them to King Rui instead. How could I do that? Since the meat is frozen, it won't go bad that quickly. Let's wait for Brother Goo to return. Zhou Huaiming handed her a thick envelope and added, "This is the reply from your hometown." He stood up and continued, "All right, I won't bother you further. When Brother Goo comes back, let me know. I'll come over and have a meal with you too." "All right, I'll definitely inform you when he returns." Zhou put the letter away and stood up to send him out. Chapter 506 Return Letters 2. After he left, Zhou Dashing walked over and reported, "Mistress, all the items have been stored in the warehouse. But what about the chickens? Should they be raised here or sent to the manor? How many are there?" "There are 2 roosters and 10 hens. It looks like they have already started laying eggs." "I see, let's keep them in the stable here. That way, it will be convenient to have eggs in the residence." Zhou added, "As for the frozen sheep, put them in the ice cellar. I was thinking of holding a small housewarming party after Qingrui finishes his work. Then, everyone can eat and enjoy a meal together. By the way, how much rice is there?" "There's rice, but it's not milled yet. There are about 200 pounds of new rice plants." "I see. Then these new rice plants will be planted as seeds for next year's harvest." Zhou Dashing nodded in agreement, saying, "One understand. I will store it well." "Good, you may leave." Zhou nodded, went to the kitchen, and told Biaozi how to make dried sweet potatoes before returning to her room. She then opened the letters. First, it was a list of dowries. She unfurled it and read it, noticing it was exactly the same as Madame Cus, but it looked a little new. Another letter seemed to be from second Uncle Goo. It briefly described the situation at home and emphasized the news that Madame Chiao was sick. He mentioned that her body was not as great as before and asked them to return to visit when they were free. Another point was to reassure them that they would stay in their hometown obediently and not drag them down. After Zhou finished reading it, she just sighed and lamented that Madame Chiao still had a heart. However, that was all. She then put the letters away and waited for Gu Qingrui to return before dealing with them. In the blink of an eye, another 3 days passed. Gu Qingrui was finally done with the work at his greenhouse. After entering her interspace at night, Zhou told him that Zhou Huaiming had returned and handed him the letters. Gu Qingrui took the letters and read them carefully. When he read that Madame Chiao had fallen ill because of the news of his aunt's death, he only smiled sarcastically. He had not forgotten how they were almost tortured to death by the Gu family when they had just transmigrated. Although Madame Chiao had some compassion at that time, she still selfishly watched them get expelled from the house. Later on, although she felt guilty and blamed herself, that was because they had made a name for themselves. Didn't that mean the act of her penance was because she wanted to take advantage of them? Otherwise, she would probably never interact with them again. Of course, since she had given them enough respect, he would also make up for it for her. He went to his study room and wrote a letter filled with concern. Finally, he attached 2 prescriptions and asked the Gu family to confirm them with Dr. Luo. At the same time, he also wrote a letter to Dr. Luo, mainly to thank him for his hard work in running the clinic. Moreover, it also meant that Dr. Luo did not need to split him any dividends before he returned. He only requested that Dr. Luo continue teaching Gu Qingxi medical skills. After the two of them were done with their work, Shouying told him about the housewarming party she was preparing. Since there's mutton, let's take the opportunity to hold a party. What do you think? Sure, let's hold it the day after tomorrow before the third prince's wedding. Get someone to make 3 mandarin duck pots tomorrow. Also, look for a place that sells beef, fish, and shrimp. Don't worry about that. I'll arrange for it. But who do we have to invite? Let's go with the previous arrangement. King Rui, Brother Zhou, Yang Wanning, and her brother. There's also King An's imperial residence, a few of my subordinates, and the 3 heads of the Ministry of Works. In that case, 3 tables would probably be enough. Yeah, let's prepare 3 tables. 1 for the women and 2 for the men. Chapter 507 Housewarming Party 1. The next day, after she had ordered the mandarin duck pot to be made at the blacksmith shop, she went to the market to look for all kinds of meat. Although the price was a little high, she still managed to buy some fresh and tender beef in the West District. Shouying then bought some beef hind and neck, a set of beef offal, and 2 pieces of beef lard. As for fish and prawns, they were cheap, so she also bought some. After returning home, she froze the beef and brought the other ingredients to the kitchen. She called Biaozi and Hai Tang over to make beef, fish, and shrimp balls with them. Next, Shouying taught Biaozi the stir-frying hot pot seasoning and dipping sauce recipe. Finally, she added some dried sweet potatoes and a small amount of radish to make a big pot of spicy beef soup. Later, she asked Biaozi and the others to make some flatbread, and dinner was ready. After Gu Qingrui reported to the Ministry of Works, he went outside to buy a few invitation cards. After filling out the invitation cards in the afternoon, he asked his attendant, Lin Yitian, one of the guards provided by King Rui Wang, to send the invitation to each family. In the blink of an eye, it was the day of the housewarming party. Yang Wanning was the first to arrive, along with Chun Shi, around noon. Shouying approached her and asked, Wanning, why are you here alone? Isn't Qinglin on vacation? No, I heard that there will be an exam next year, so he hasn't had a holiday since he returned to the academy last time. I see. That's true, studying is more important. How's your family now? Shouying asked. Fine. They're busy preparing the dowry now, so I'm sure they won't have the time to pay attention to me for a while. Yang Wanning shook her head as she replied. However, she knew that was because Mrs. Chue was too confident in her spy and the hardy ice plant. Otherwise, she would not be able to live such a peaceful life. That's right, she had already traced the hardy ice plant to the hands of Mrs. Chue. But she did not say anything because she did not discover that her mother had died because of the plant. Instead, she picked out the hardy ice plant and put it in Mrs. Cui's tea leaves. Shouying did not ask any more questions. After all, Yang Wanning was not a real young lady. Perhaps she was older than Shouying in her previous life, so this meant Shouying did not need to keep an eye on everything she did. After a simple chat, Madame Consortin and Mingyu arrived. The 2 of them immediately stood up and greeted them. The old madam smiled and said, Good, good. You're all good children. Get up quickly. Judging from your complexion, you look much better. Shouying stood up and helped her sit at the head of the table. It's all thanks to Qingrui. My body hasn't been this light in years. The old madam smiled. It's great to hear that the medicine is effective. After Shouying finished speaking, she personally went to the kitchen to brew a cup of sanchi flower tea. This is a tea made from the sanchi flower. Try it and see if it suits your taste. I heard this tea has a good effect on lowering blood pressure. She then poured some rose tea for Mingyu and said, "This is a tea for beauty, fragrance, and relaxation." Is that so? One guess one must try it. I'll buy some from the herb shop later. Madame Consortin took the teacup and replied with a face full of expectation. Oh, this is the popular winter rose tea. I bought some at first, but I couldn't get more of it after finishing it. Whenever I want to drink it, I have to enter the palace or go to a tea house, Mingyu exclaimed. It's made of roses. If you like them, I'll wrap some for you to bring back later. Please do. If there is more, I want it too. Yang Wanning added. No problem, we have more than enough for you too. Zhou Ying nodded. Then they sat and chatted about the gossip in the capital. Chapter 508 Housewarming Party 2. The hot topic was regarding King Kong, the fourth prince. It was said that Zhou Jiaying, his secondary consort, busied herself so much that she almost died on the street because she was preparing the betrothal gifts for the main consort. For a moment, Zhou Jiaying went viral. Of course, there were good and bad things to say about her. Zhou Ying, who knew Zhou Jiaying well, admired her scheming. No matter how others saw her, as a secondary consort, she was preparing betrothal gifts for the main consort. It was obvious to the outside world that, as a secondary consort, she was a contender to be the head of the household and was on excellent terms with King Kong. When the main consort marries in, it would be hard to say whether she could seize power. However, Zhou Ying knew this was stupid. As a pregnant woman, instead of playing tricks, Zhou Jiaqing might as well give birth to the child safely. If something really happened to the child, it would be too late to regret it. The rest of the gossip was nothing noteworthy. What Zhou Ying didn't expect was that Sun Myoke's scandal didn't spread even one bit. Not long after, the first prince's wife, Consort Hui, a melancholic beauty, walked in under Quihua's lead. Zhou Ying paused momentarily, immediately stood up, and greeted her. Zhou Ying greets Consort Hui. Yang Wanning and Mingyu also stood up and bowed. I came uninvited. Please forgive me, Mrs. Gu. After Hui Wangfei smiled at Zhou Ying, she went forward and greeted Madame Consortin. Greetings, fourth aunt. We're family, so there's no need to be so polite. The old madam nodded. After Consort Hui sat down, Zhou Ying personally made her a cup of tea. Consort Hui swept her gaze across the room a moment later and asked, Mrs. Gu, there's not even a fireplace in this room. Why is it so warm? We modified it with a heated floor, similar to a farmer's brick bed. Although it costs quite some firewood, it does bring convenience. Zhou Ying explained the reason. What a great idea. It also saves on charcoal usage. I'm sure it can save us a lot of silver this winter. It shouldn't be much different as it does consume a fair bit of firewood. Of course, it's way warmer than using a fireplace. I'll try to modify my courtyard later. Otherwise, one won't be able to stand the cold in December. Madame Consortin spoke up. Sure. If you want to renovate your courtyard, I'll get those workers to look for you at your residence. All right, then, I'll leave this matter to you. The atmosphere was not as relaxed as it had been at the beginning because of Consort Hugh's participation. Fortunately, she did not talk much and just curiously asked about the greenhouse. Zhou Ying did not hide anything, and she gave her a simple introduction to the theory behind it. After a while, Madame Qin, the wife of the Minister of Works, Madame Ma, the wife of the left assistant minister, and Madame Bai, the wife of the right assistant minister, arrived. After greeting each other, they exchanged simple pleasantries before chatting with Madame Consort, and Zhou Ying saw this and gave Yang Wanning a look, indicating that she helped take care of it. Later, she politely said a few words and went to the kitchen. She was just worried since it was the first time that Biaozi and Hai Tang were preparing a hot pot, so she was afraid they wouldn't be able to make it right. Sure enough, little Biao was staring at the clean copper pot when she entered the kitchen. Zhou immediately went forward and taught him how to prepare it. She glanced at the main dishes that Hai Tang had prepared. There were scallion pancakes, sesame seed cakes, rice cakes, and chestnut cakes. She also took a glance at the side dishes. There were mutton slices, beef slices, fish balls, shrimp balls, beef tripes, blood tofu, noodles, cabbage, radish, assorted veggies, and fungus. After making sure that there were no mistakes, she said, "The men's tables will be set in the front. When Qingrui comes back, just bring the copper pot over." Then, she looked at Biaozi and asked, "Brother Biaozi, do you know how to heat this copper hot pot?" Chapter 509 Housewarming Part 3 Yeah, I know. Don't worry. Alright then, I'll head out now. Zhou then brought a pot of hot water into the courtyard and handed it to Kuihua. Seeing that everyone was chatting happily, she didn't go up and say anything. Instead, she called Shizhu over and started to clean up the table. She then placed the wine and sour plum soup aside. When Gu Qingrui and the others arrived, they came in and bowed to Madame Consortant before returning to the outer courtyard. However, what she did not expect was that the people who came were not only the ones they had invited. All the princes were here, and even the son of King Xian had come. Fortunately, they had enough space for everyone, albeit slightly cramped. After they left, Zhou immediately went to the kitchen and asked them to add another set of beef meatballs for the men's table. She also asked them to prepare more charcoal. This time, when she returned, she carried a copper hot pot with her and placed it on the table. Meanwhile, Shizhu and Kuihua immediately turned around to serve the dishes. When Mingyu saw this, she curiously pulled a stool over and sat down, asking, "Sister Zhou, what is this? And what's inside?" "It's red, smells spicy, and is slightly choking." "Why does this yellow soup smell sour too?" "Hot pot is one of the main dishes at the restaurant I opened in my hometown." Zhou explained to them in detail how to enjoy hot pot immediately. "That sounds good. That way, we don't have to worry about the food getting cold." Madame Qin exclaimed in surprise. "Indeed, my stomach can't stand eating cold dishes in the middle of winter." Madame Consortant nodded in agreement. "It's nice to hear everyone likes it. However, if you have any wounds or are heaty today, it's best to eat less or not eat the spicy section. The sour-tasting soup beside it is also very delicious." Zhou reminded them and called everyone over to start their meal. In the end, only Mingyu and Yang Wanning sat at the side of the spicy hot pot. Zhou didn't say much when she saw this. They would know when they ate later. The side dishes were served quickly. Because too many side dishes were on the table, most of the extras had to be placed on the dining table opposite them. Quickly, 2 maidservants took some chopsticks to help everyone place the food into the hot pot. After the dipping sauce bowl was served, Zhou took the shared chopsticks and placed some mutton slices into the 2 hot pots. "Everyone, you don't have to be so polite. Just put whatever you want to eat into the pot." After saying that, she sat down. After the mutton was cooked, it was ready to eat. The women's respective maidservants went up and picked up the cooked ingredients for their mistresses. After finishing taking all of the cooked food out, they continued to put more in. Wow! After cooking it this way, not only did the mutton lose its gamey smell, but it also became especially tender and delicious. Madame Consortant nodded in satisfaction. In the past, she had been obsessed with pork, mainly because of the peculiar smell of beef and mutton. Now that she could perfectly remove this peculiar smell, it was not impossible for her to eat less or even no pork in the future. At that moment, Mingyu picked up a piece of spicy mutton for the old madam and placed it in her bowl. "Grandmother, try this. It's especially delicious and not as spicy as you think." Madam Consort and dipped a little sauce into the mutton, placed it in her mouth, and nodded repeatedly. "Indeed, this has a little spicy taste and is enjoyable to eat." When Consort Hui heard this, she immediately looked at her maidservant. The maidservant understood her intentions and picked up a piece of spicy mutton for her. Soon, the Consort Hui liked the taste so much that she immediately got up to move her seat over. When everyone saw this, they also started to take more of the spicy hot pot. Madame Bai was the only one who stayed on the sour hot pot the entire time. She mainly ate beef and hadn't touched the mutton one bit. Chapter 5 10 Housewarming Party 4. Seeing this, Zhou didn't say much to prevent both sides from getting awkward. Instead, she handed her a small bowl of sour plum soup and said, "This can help cut the greasiness. Do have some of it." Madame Bai nodded with a smile and continued eating. After the meal, everyone took their leave after a short rest. Of course, Yang Wanning and Mingyu stayed behind. After Zhou was done cleaning up, Mingyu came up and put her arm around her shoulder. "Sister Zhou, you haven't forgotten about our martial arts sparring, right?" "No, but you just drank. Are you sure you want to spar now?" "I'm sure. One came here today for that." "Of course, having the hot pot was great, and that's my love now." "Alright, let's just spar casually." "Let's go." Zhou then brought her to the backyard. Seeing this, Yang Wanning followed excitedly. To be honest, she had never seen two women spar in her 2 lifetimes, so she was full of anticipation. After arriving at the backyard, Mingyu stretched her wrists and ankles and asked, "How about we compete using fist techniques?" Zhou nodded silently and looked at her warily. A moment later, Mingyu rushed over. Zhou dodged to the side and struck her away with a palm. Mingyu staggered a few steps forward with a stunned expression before stabilizing her footsteps. She turned around and looked at Zhou with a serious expression. "Let's start now." Zhou nodded and got into position. Seeing this, Mingyu rushed over again and tried punching Zhou Ying's face. She also sent a kick at Zhou Ying's right side of the head. This time, Zhou Ying did not dodge the attacks. Instead, she raised her hands and slammed against the tendons outside Mingyu's arm, quickly stopping her punch. Quickly, she took advantage of the moment when Mingyu lost her balance and grabbed her right leg. Then, she bent her leg and tried pressing down. When Mingyu saw this, she spun around and raised her left foot to kick Zhou Ying's head. Zhou Ying did a backflip to dodge it, but her grip naturally loosened. After the two of them stood firmly once more, they clashed at close range. Zhou Ying used Tai Chi this time. At that moment, Mingyu clearly felt Zhou Ying's oppression. She found many chances and was about to succeed in taking Zhou Ying down, but a small push in the right direction always resolved her attacks. She was being stopped everywhere, and she could not even fight back. When she thought of this, she felt aggrieved. Meanwhile, the strength of her punches became stronger and stronger. Zhou Ying was afraid that Mingyu would really get angry, so she immediately changed to a grappling technique to subdue Mingyu. Before Mingyu could react, she was pressed down. Chapter 5:11 Learning Self-Defense. Seeing this, Mingyu and Yang Wanning also stood up and left. However, the next morning, Yang Wanning came to visit again. Her purpose was to learn martial arts. "Do you want to learn martial arts or use it for self-defense?" Zhou Ying raised her head and asked. "Is there a difference?" Yang Wanning asked in confusion. "Of course, if you want to defend yourself, you'll just need to learn a few simple moves to subdue the enemy quickly. However, learning martial arts is not something that could be done overnight. Let's learn self-defense first and see if I'm cut out for martial arts. If it goes well, 111 continue learning. Young Wanning hesitated for a moment before replying. That works too. Zhou then began to teach her self-defense techniques. Of course, it was not the kind of dirty trick from the modern ages. Otherwise, it would be bad for her reputation. Instead, she taught her how to subdue her opponent from all angles and how to attack the opponent's weaknesses. Of course, she also taught underhanded tactics, which could only be used to save her life in times of crisis. At the end of Zhou Ying's lesson, young Wanning looked uncomfortable, but her eyes were sparkling. These underhanded tricks were too effective. This is not something that can be learned in one go. You still have to practice more. After saying that, she turned around and walked toward the main courtyard. Let's go. It'll give you something good to keep for self-defense. What is it? Young Wanning immediately ran over and asked curiously. You'll know when you see it. Zhou brought her back to the main courtyard with a mysterious expression. She took out a palm-sized pepper spray that was refined from a mixture of devil chili, mustard, onions, and medical alcohol and handed it to her. Do you see that little eye on it? If someone bullies you, you can aim that little eye at the other party's face and spray it down. What's inside? Young Wanning asked curiously as she stared at the liquid inside. You'll know when you try spraying it, but don't face it to anyone. After Young Wanning found the small outlet, she turned around and sprayed it into the air. Suddenly, a choking smell spread in all directions. Young Wanning started coughing non-stop, sneezing and crying. Miss, are you all right? Chuanxi wanted to help, but Zhou stopped her. Zhou took a few steps back and went out to get a basin of warm water for her. Wash your face, you'll feel much better. Young Wanning finally understood why this thing could be used for self-defense. As long as this hit someone, most people could not fight back.